In this video, we're going to be focusing on using Affinity Photo and creating a scary movie poster. So this is a web-based version of the poster. File size is still fairly large, so the processing power needed to commit this kind of detail on this images and stuff that we use in this series is kind of up there, but definitely follow along. If you're a pro subscriber or lifetime subscriber, you can download these assets and use them at will. Included will be color palettes and just the stock that we use, as well as the typefaces, and of course this movie letter. It's called a building block, and it's kind of just the look and feel that most movies resort to when creating a style for a movie poster of some type. So right now it's just using filler content, and then included is a font that will actually render it the right way. Without further ado, we can get started and create this concept. What I want to do first is export the current palette just to grab a few colors that I used throughout to use in our new document. So I'm going to add an export, and then I'll save it to the start folder for now. So you'll have access to this once you download it yourself. We'll just save it like that. The new document's going to be in pixel-based size. So what we want is, I believe this one was 1400 by 2100. So we'll do that again. And we'll, instead of the type, we'll go for web and then 1400, 2100. And then I'm going to include a margin just to include it. Maybe just an inch, or say 100 pixels on each side. You could also type 1 inch here and it'll convert it to pixels. So maybe we'll just do that. So 1 inch. So with that done, we can go ahead and click OK. And there's our document. Okay, so to start things off, I'll import that color palette we just exported as a document palette. I don't want to save this globally, so I'll go ahead and include that. And there we go. So you can rename that palette whatever you like. I'll just maybe do that just for the sake of showing. Just to make it look a little nicer up there. Okay, great. So I'll save this down as a end file in our end folder. And we'll need a few things in this one that are sourced in the start folder as well too. So we can open those separately for now. And I'm going to go to the start folder. I'll open the main figure image we'll use, and then one in the back that's going to be the background. And then we'll have a noise texture that we'll use later on as well. Okay, so with all those open, we can rock and roll. First order of business I want to take care of is extracting this figure, kind of scary looking person, from this photo, because the background isn't going to jive with what we're after. So I'll unlock this layer, and I'll actually just hit Command C and copy it over to our documents here. And we'll shrink this down considerably. And in fact, more realistic approach there would probably be to just get the selection we need from this image and then copy it over. So let's do that first. We'll use the selection brush tool to grab a selection of this person and go rough at first, but then we'll refine it later. I'll go up and hit refine at the top here. And it should do some bit of refining by default just based on the settings that are already configured here. I'll go ahead and just hit apply, and we'll use what's there. And what I want to do is just hit Command Shift C, and you'll end up copying that merged piece over. So we'll paste that in just as that new layer. And you'll see there's a little fragments and pixelation and stuff going around the edges. We can tighten that up with a mask within this frame as we get to it. So I'll just leave it as is for now. It's a good start. Outside of that, we just need this image to work with as well. So I'm just going to copy it as is and paste that in. And we'll actually want to scale this one up a bit to get some perspective in this final piece. So I'm going to push it to the back with Command Shift left bracket and zoom in a bit. And we might come down in size just so a little more is in frame. in fact even more, and we can add a fill in the background to kind of compensate for the floor that we want in view. So kind of centralize that. There we go. So this background, as is, we can tweak it to be something a bit more. We can add a rectangle. And that's going to be overlaying everything right now, but we'll send it to back as well. And then I want to semi-sample the flooring here. It's kind of a dark color, and then fill that rectangle in with that. You can see already it's almost looking fairly good. We can just add a mask to that image so it blends a bit better, and it's as simple as adding a mask, getting out a brush with your B key, and then coming in, probably increase the opacity some, and we'll leave the hardness down, maybe 40% or so, and just kind of go around that line if you can see it. And it's great if you can't see it, because that's exactly what we're going for. So, and we could even hide her for a second and just kind of blend that in. There we go. So already that's, you know, the initial composition we're looking at here. Obviously there's tons of effects going on, but we can optimize those as we go. All right, so to set the stage here, I also want to add our building block text, and I might make an asset out of this because I don't plan on changing this. And if you're a pro or lifetime subscriber, you can totally just download this and use it as will. This text is modifiable. Right now it's an embedded document in this document, so you can add it as you please. I'll probably just end up doing that in this one too. So why don't we place that from the start folder. You're going to see a credit block white Affinity Photo file. It's going to be very big, so when you come in with it, just scale it to where you want the bounding box to be. I'm just going to kind of work it in where I think would look great. And just for some reference, it looks like her hands are very close to the very bottom of this, so we'll probably do the same thing. And I'm going to actually leave the very background layer and lock it, so we can't modify it mistakenly. Yeah, we've got two there. We don't need that one. So I'll leave this one, lock it, and leave this base rectangle too. So we can call that, let's say, just background again. Main image. And we'll leave those alone. So we're going to add more effects to this to make it more realistic and dark and bold and contrasty like this, but we're not quite there yet. I want to make sure everything else is in check. So with these images in frame, we've got our building block in frame too. And like I said, you can edit this as well. You'll see it's an embedded document, so you just double click to open that. Get out your type tool by hitting T, and then you could just type away. You'll need the font in the start folder to edit this and give the look and feel. So definitely reference that. Now begins the effects. We also have our text to worry about too. So Sleepwalker is the fictitious title I'm giving this. It's actually just set in Georgia. You should have that on your machine, which is a perk. So I'm gonna actually type that out and just make it 2 lines. So Sleepwalker, and we'll set it in Georgia. And it's actually it's of course gonna be massive. So we'll get that up to speed, set it to bold. It's in all caps. So let's see how that looks in all caps. We'll go to character, make that all the way. Yeah, there we go. Scale it down. You can just use the handles here. You can actually set in a font type or size. Okay, so let's center this text, and we'll scale it dramatically, of course. So bring it up, and it's gonna be central. And we'll probably work with that leading. Right now it's got an automatic leading. I'm gonna decrease that so it's a little tighter. Maybe something like that. And maybe we'll go up a bit in size, 180. And the leading's gonna affect that as well, so we'll increase it just a tad. And then we have our initial color that we used. It's a gradient, a slight gradient on it that I used initially. And I'm gonna actually control that gradient with the gradient tool first. So we can have that layer selected and modify it there. There's gonna be the lighter color that's up in the top right and the darker color that's in the bottom left. I would just use your own judgment in terms of making this look balanced. Other than that, that's kind of the effect we're after. I think we can increase the tracking as well. And this particular letter, I might decrease the tracking. Might need to do that on the W. Yeah. Go negative there. See, I wanted that W to be closer to that A. So out of the box fonts just don't always work the way you like. Professional typographers end up kerning and tweaking individual letters daily. So it's just something you have to kind of get along with in your design software. So Affinity Photo, you can do that by selecting each particular letter and then adjusting those coordinates here where you need to. I'll save that down, and we have this tagline that's just sleep with one eye open. I'll probably pull that over. It's set in a font called Franklin Gothic FS, which is free to download. I'll link to it. So was it sleep with one eye open? And Franklin Gothic. And it's going to be set in book and be pretty small, 40 or so. Well, set automatic on the leading because it's using our settings from the previous font. So I'll probably increase the tracking quite a bit here, maybe 100 or so. And then we want a gray scale for that text. We probably even want it smaller than this too, so 32 or so. Okay, and we could start with white and probably go down from there. I probably want a gray scale though, so we can get our color chooser out and just come down a bit so it's not so bright. Right about there looks okay to me. Okay, and then we could center virtually everything in this document. So I'll do that with our alignment tools here. Just center those. Looks like they're pretty close already. Okay, great. So we have a basis of at least the layout of this poster. So what we want to do next is start applying effects, and those are going to make all the difference in making this look realistic and cool in the end. So I'll start with this background there, and you can either use the built-in gradient or vignette filter, but I'm going to actually paint a vignette on just so I have more control in the end. And for now, I'll hide everything in this document. I also want to tweak the photo to be a little bit darker too, so we'll start doing that with our levels. Just kind of give some more of the blacks into that, and you don't really need any more lights, so I'll keep that as is, and we'll nest that below that image just so it affects only it. And on top of that, I like to use curves, so I'll grab that and do a slight S curve just to kind of give some oomph to that. Okay, great. And on the very final piece in the end, I did some masking to be pretty much black around the edges in the bottom. So it's going to make all the difference in the dynamic tones of the photo. So I'll add a layer here and get the brush out with our black selected. And you can just set maybe a half 50% opacity, and hardness to 0 is pretty common in this approach. So you just kind of softly paint around the edges, giving some context here. And in this case, you almost want a super large brush to give a more realistic fade effect. So you don't want to see that it's been painted on so much. And don't worry about going too deep. So you can mask this layer and reduce it at the same time. So as I did here, it's pretty dark, but I'm going to add a mask, grab the brush tool, and black still selected will actually take away in this case. So let me hide this so we can come back and paint some of that off, because I want these lights to kind of remain lit. Decrease the opacity quite a bit and just kind of feather in that bit. Yeah. like that. So already that's looking a lot more vibrant to me. We can even increase the contrast by adding another layer effect or adjustment. So I'll go to brightness contrast. Increase the contrast a bit. As well as the brightness. I think I like that. Okay, so we'll slowly add layer by layer back in. So she'll need a ton of work, and already the hue and saturation of this image is kind of poor. So we can work with it, but it's going to take some effects for sure. So let's start by working with our HSL, and we kind of want to make her more of a blue tone as the image behind it. We almost want to blend the tones. So in this case, I'm going to move these color faders until it's close. So something like that. But you notice her hands are super green. That's going to be a very detailed effect we're going to apply here in a minute. That's going to make all the difference. Okay, that's looking okay. So for now, I would say ignore her hands, but we're going to focus on her in particular, just getting the coloring right. So I'm going to add another effect that's going to be levels, kind of just to make those a little more punchy. Curves, of course, always make a difference. It really makes that punchy effect even more punchy. So in this case, you scoop it in a sense to get more dark here and then more light at the top. Okay, so with that, we're pretty good. We can even go in as far as, if you were to spend a lot of time on this, I would recommend it. Going in, basically following the outside edge of the figure and then doing a bit of refinement where you see all the little fuzzies coming off the side. It's my best term to describe those. Just like fragments that came out when we masked it a bit, so that you kind of just need to adjust it. So with that done, we're kind of close. Got the look and feel decently there. One thing I forgot on the background image I'd like to add is a kind of a blur effect that might make a little more difference in terms of perspective. So I'll go into that layer, make sure I'm on the right layer. Yeah, that one. And I want to add a live filter that is a depth of field. And then we actually want to use tilt shift, and I'll actually rotate this vertical. And just increase the radius a bit and play with this to see if you can find something you like. The general idea is that the left and right edges will be kind of blurry, but aside from that, it will be clear in the background. So increase the radius. So it's a subtle effect, but the left and right edges now have a bit of blur. So if I hide and show that, you'll see. And like any other mask, you can go in and refine this. So I might do that just a tad in the middle. So you could just paint black onto that mask and it should cut some of it away. Okay, so now let's focus on her hands. They're awfully green in this case, and I need to basically pin those out and then add color effects over top. So it's a little more manual approach, but it makes all the difference. So what I'm going to do first is pin out each hand on a new curves layer, and then we'll make a selection based off of that, and then add some more fills that make the color appear correct. So you'll just want to plot a bunch of points, just following the contour of the fingers and hand. Okay, so with that plotted, like, it doesn't have to be perfect, but it's just enough to follow the entire contour and get the main fill sorted out. So we want to come up here and hit selection, and then I'll create a new layer. And I'm going to fill it with these predefined colors I have here. First is going to be this skin adjustment red, and then I have another blue we'll add as a second layer over top. So I'll add the red, and we'll do that with the fill tool. And it's going to look pretty gross at first, but we'll grab that, bring down the opacity quite a bit, like 25%, and then duplicate that layer. And this one's going to have the fill of the blue. And we can toy with different effects here on the blend modes and see which maybe looks the best. So color might look okay there, and zooming out might make more difference, so you can blend it in with the rest of the image. I think that looks okay though, so we might repeat that process for the other hand. So I'll group those and rename it right hand adjustments. And we'll go do the same process on the left. All right, so we'll make that selection, and you might wonder why I plot so many points, and it's really just preference. You can certainly pin this out and then use just as many points as you prefer, but I just prefer this approach because it's quicker for me, and I tend to illustrate with my mouse as opposed to someone who might use a tablet or their iPad or something like that. So this is just kind of my approach. So feel free to do whatever you prefer there. But let's make that selection. And again, create a new pixel layer, fill it with the red here, and we'll come down to 25% again. And then we'll duplicate that layer with Command J. And this one will be filled with the blue, so we'll select blue, grab that, 25% again, but we're going to set this blending mode to color. And we'll group those and call them left-handed adjustments, even though that is the right hand, but I'm calling it left because it's what I see on the left, so forgive me there. So that looks a lot more natural zoomed out, and that's exactly what we're after. So things are looking good. So I'm going to group those and just call this main figure. And to add some kind of even more scariness to this, you could duplicate that layer perhaps and maybe send that one to the back, and then we'll do a live adjustment layer again, but it's going to be a motion filter. And I like to just do a 90-degree filter and just increase that radius quite a bit. You start to see kind of a ghostly effect appear. So something like that. It's a little subtle, but it's kind of neat to see. All right, so we'll leave that alone for that, and then you can even move that layer up, so you can see the hands below. That's kind of definitely creepier. All right, so we'll leave that. And the one that's in the back is the blurred one. So I'm gonna actually decrease that opacity just a tad so it's not so bright and bold. Okay, so with that done, we have at least a good state for this. To add some more dynamics to it, I'm gonna select the actual layer of the figure by command clicking that thumbnail, and you'll actually select the radius of it, so that's kind of nice. Inside of it, I'm going to create a new pixel layer and grab the brush tool again. We have our black still, and I like the settings that are already there, so 55% is okay. We'll just kind of feather in some black. Actually, that's a little too bold. Let me back out there. And I'll go down way on the opacity, so even further, so like 20% maybe. And we can decrease the brush size, and I just want to feather the edge of each side. So we'll deselect that with Command D, and what we can do from there is add another selection, add a new pixel layer, and I want to kind of create a sense of light at the top here, so I'm going to actually go to white in this case and just feather in a bit more on the top of the head. And with that pixel layer, we can just deselect. That's just that top portion now. And we'll use a blend mode here to just kind of amplify that light into the head. Let's see which one looks the best. Hue looks okay because it adds a little vibrance there. I think I'll set with hue, and you can even duplicate that layer to make it even more prominent. Great, so that's a very subtle effect that makes a little bit of difference in terms of making some more light source on the actual figure. So Looks like the opacity is set wrong here. 50 or so. So with that, we're pretty close. I added a few more effects on the refined image here that is going to be based on some textures. So that's in the start folder. So I'll add that next. And it's actually open right here. So I'll copy that over, just Command C. So I'll probably flip this because the noise is on the top and I kind of want it to be there. And probably scale it up a bit so it looks like so. And obviously it's not working great at the moment, but we'll bring it down at least below the text layer and see what happens with some of the blend modes. Multiply looks okay. I think we'll sit with multiply and then decrease the opacity to like 50%. Yeah, and then the nice thing here is we have that main figure which we can select and then go back to that background layer and hit mask with that selection active. So you'll mask that layer, but we actually want to invert the selection in this case. So I'll backtrack there, go up to select, invert, and then hit that mask. So it should mask her out, but not behind her. So that's exactly what we want. And I feel it's a little too forward still, so I'll leave that out. And you can go back in and mask different areas out too. So we have white right now. If I have black, I go back in and paint some of this light out. I kind of want that light to be clear. So still, I think her head could still be a little shinier because of the light coming up from the top isn't quite clear enough. We might duplicate this layer and do a different approach. Something like that, and maybe just decrease the opacity. And maybe I'll do some adjustments to it with curves. Need to make sure that that is relative to that layer. I think something like that works okay. So we just set a soft light on that, a second layer. So we've got a soft light that's 100%, and then below that is a hue at 100% that just gives it a little more color. We could possibly do a bit of shadow behind her as well. So I'll actually make a new layer and probably paint that in. We call this highlights. So behind the main figure and the blur figure, we have a pixel layer. Put that there. And I'll just paint some black in at a pretty low opacity and 0 hardness. The saturation's got a little bit of red to it. I kind of like that. So that's new. I didn't actually have that in the original, but we'll work with it. This shoulder is looking kind of odd to me. We might, I know it's part of the image, but it looks just kind of out of place. So I might mask that bit out completely. Maybe. We'll see what that looks like. Does that look off? It kind of looks off. So I might undo that and see about just painting over it now with this color. So maybe I'll do that instead. Create a new pixel layer. I'll have the brush tool active. I'm gonna hit Option and click, and you can sample the color. So that'll get into our picker tool here. We'll select that color and then just paint over it. And possibly add effect of just a tiny bit of blur. Looks kind of off. Let me see if I can mask that bit now. Kind of fade it in there. There we go. Backtrack, go back to white here. Paint that back in, go back to black, hitting X on the keyboard, switching quickly there. There we go. That's a little better. I don't think you'll notice it 100%, but if you do study it, of course, you might see that, but I think I'll live with it. So that's looking pretty good. So we've got our base is done. There can be refinements. I feel like the color of her could be a little darker and maybe more blue. So the one thing I might have forgotten to do is add a color filter on the figure itself. So I'm gonna go back in and do that real quick. So we'll just select this layer, get a layer adjustment, and go into where are we at? Lens filter. And I want to choose a bluish color. Maybe something we can pick from frame here. So something like that. A little more blue though. Okay, so then we'll bring in our text to kind of give this some more context. And then our text itself needs some work. So we've got everything else looking okay. I think I'm going to make this slightly opaque. It's not so bright. And probably increase this just a tad. Okay, so next we have options. The text itself can have a mask, and what I like to do is add some texture based off of that. So by default, there are some grungy kind of textures in Affinity Photo. You can grab those and just kind of go to town, just clicking slightly throughout, kind of randomizing where you click. And you can set the color to black here to go full 100% opacity and hardness. And feel free to find other brushes that you might want to use and just import them. You can do that. Photoshop brushes can import into Affinity Photo and work wonderfully. Let's see if we got something a little bolder. Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. So I want to add some adjustments to the layer effects as well. I want to add a drop shadow here, so an outer shadow. I'm going to probably keep the angle at 270, increase the radius quite a bit, and the offset, and up the opacity, of course. Kind of just make that text punch off the page. And a slight outline might do some wonders here. Something lighter, but maybe opaque. So I'll use white and just do a single outline. It is affecting the mask though, so that's kind of an issue. But maybe we can go and do a different alignment and see what happens. Outside's probably the best bet, and then see if we can't find something that looks okay. All right, I think I'll not use the outline, instead use the stroke on the actual text because we don't have one. So use white, so that's just around the outside edge, which is what we want. And I'll probably use the paintbrush kind of contour, and you can adjust it. Go to 2 points, see if that does better. Yeah, you can adjust it with this setting here. So you can, I like to just go drag these all the way down and kind of scoop it a bit, maybe go experiment with this. And I'm going to make the actual opacity of this a little less, so it's just a slight kind of edgy look. And then one thing I didn't set was some noise on our gradient, our initial gradient. So I'm going to adjust the fill, go into the color, and it is set. Okay, so that was saved by our palette. So I have noise on these by default, except for this one. So I'll increase that. That just adds some nice noise to the text so it's not perfectly set. And we can just adjust this to be about a little more centered. It's looking pretty good. I'm trying to see if I did anything different on our first one. I think the second one's kind of turned out a little nicer. The text is a little larger. And I'm not sure about that stroke after looking at it. No, maybe we'll go with a darker color. Just a lighter red. So I'm gonna just debunk on that. And we'll call that pretty darn good. So yeah, I've got our textures. Our background image is pretty bold. There we have it, guys. So this is, I would say, the finished piece. The text here could probably use some adjustments. I could probably tweak this for hours, but I think I'll stop there. I think we need to make a mask on the individual itself real quick though. You notice if I take away the text, you can see her legs and they're not quite jiving. So I'm gonna actually mask out the leg portion. select the mask on that. Just kind of fade that out. I kind of want her legs to not even be in frame. Looks like we got a brush we don't really want to use there. It's all right though. I'll undo that a bit. All right, so on our mask, I want to decrease the opacity and definitely the hardness. And we want to fade this out. There we go. I think that works better. It's not a huge thing you'd notice, but it's something I did notice, and that little bit of detail makes a little difference. Okay, great. So I'm gonna call that good. I think our finished piece here is looking fairly good. I'm fairly confident with it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you need any of the assets, you can subscribe and get the Pro subscription and download these and use the fonts, the photos, all those things. Have access to that. Look forward to seeing your own versions. If you have them set up and want to follow along, feel free to share them in the comments below. And with that, I thank you for watching.